one time Testament that there was what to me was an obscure verse, and I didn't take the time to research it last night. But there's a place that God says, I gave you the musicians to lead you in worship. I gave you the dancers to lead you on the parade. And I think of, and God gave directions for how the vestments of the priests should be done with their very best, the finest dye, the best bells, the finest weavers. Everything that comes into my house should be your very best. Mm-hmm. And I think that carried over to some of us down through the centuries of on Sunday morning, we come in our best, but we also sometimes made a religion of that. So that if somebody came in and they weren't dressed in, maybe they were dressed in their very best, but maybe they were on their way someplace else and the living Holy Spirit said, you go in that door. So the reason I start with that this morning is because I think that's partly what's going on between Jesus and the woman from Samaria. I want you to tell me, if I were a 5-year-old girl born in Jerusalem of Orthodox Jewish people, what would my mother or my grandmother tell me about those Samaritans? You've heard that tone of voice, haven't you? Those Samaritans. Mm-hmm. Only it depends on what century you live in and who's in and who's out. Do you remember why the Samaritans were untouchable? They worshiped Yahweh. They knew about God. They were offspring of the Abraham culture. But in the area of Samaria, that was more a pasture area, not as mountainous. There were mountains, but there was a large meadow or plain. Think of the Midwest. It's sort of the Midwest between the South and the North of Jesus communities. But Orthodox or worshiping Jews, law-keeping Jews weren't even really supposed to go through Samaria, but they might run into trouble over there. Mm-hmm. What other Samaritan do we know about from the New Testament that's held up as a real lesson for us?
The Good Samaritan.
Yeah, the Good Samaritan. I want you to think in terms of this woman is the Good Samaritan also. There's a man and there's a woman who are Good Samaritans. It's not pointed out for us, but we know when we hear a word in the Bible that we've heard anywhere else in the Bible, a bell is supposed to go off like a little angel bell. Ding. And somebody's supposed to, does that remind you of? That's how they taught. Mm-hmm. They sat down at a table and they remembered every other story they'd ever heard that might relate to the story they were talking about. So I want us to kind of keep all this in our mind. One of my jobs in seminary, my work study jobs, I had a good old safe Volvo. And so one of my jobs was driving to the airports to pick up visiting dignitaries. And there were 12 seminaries, all in Berkeley at that time. They called it Holy Hill. And I would get my assignment to go pick up this lecturer or that lecturer or this dignitary. And I met some very interesting people. And one of the people I picked up twice a week was our professor of, I think, philosophy of religion or something, some requirement. And he was a world-class scholar, Dr. John Bennett. And he said one day on one of our trips, what's your favorite book in the Bible? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. I love the book of Hebrews. And he said, well, what's your favorite gospel? And I said, I think the Gospel of John. And he said, well, what story? And I said, I love the story of the woman at the well. And he said, well, you know, the Gospel of John isn't one of the synoptics. And we've talked about that, the three that are more alike. And I said, are you saying it's not worthy? And he thought a minute and he said, that's the same question my wife asks me. She's a feminist. She too was a world-class scholar, but She typed his papers while he went on and became a tenured professor, and she raised the children. And then I was in another class I had my favorite Bible teacher was John Flanagan, who was a Servite father, Roman Catholic. Do you know anything about the Servites?
No.
Well, they were a small group of priests at the time of Romeo and Juliet, those real fusses between families in Rome.
Wow.
And they were the Servite fathers. They were servants of Mary to bring peace to the warring intelligentsia of Rome. And he was on the fast track in Rome. He'd been there 8 or 10 years. He was a fair, bright-eyed boy. And he had a massive heart attack. And his physician told him, you got to get off that track. God hasn't meant you for that. You have a heart for another ministry. And he said, well, what'll I do? And his doctor said, maybe you could teach. So he ended up in Berkeley. And I loved his teaching so much that I took his synoptic class and then his class on John. And he had the idea that all the parables in the New Testament are short dramas with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he thought and believed that some of these disciples and early teachers were acting groups like mummers that went from community to community and just put on little plays, drew a crowd, and then had the discussion afterwards and drew people in to this living spirit. And that came to life to me when I was looking at this story once again. This is a drama. It's a wonderful story, and it would make it partly comedy, partly forgiveness and inclusion. Fantastic story. So for Neil Flanagan's class, when the doctor told him, you can't have 60 students in this class and 48 students in that class and have each one do a 20-page paper, that's over 100 20-page papers. He said, you can't do that. And he said, well, what'll I do? And he said, well, do what they do in law school and in medical school. You have teams. A team works together and comes out with one project. They have to work harder working together to iron out whatever idea they have. And whatever they have collectively will be more than any one of them could have done by themselves. So I chose for my final paper as a senior in seminary on the book of John as the woman at the well. And my partner was Erica. And we couldn't get 3 other fellows to work with us. So we thought, well, good, this will go more easily. So we decided, what do we want to do besides a 20-page paper? And we said we would like to do a large banner that visually showed not only the woman at the well, but any number of other I ams. And we didn't know where we were going to go with it when we started, but I had a stash of fabric and we had no money. And so this is what we came up with. And I tried to show Jesus not as a blue-eyed blonde, but more as a Mediterranean man. And I tried to show the woman at the well, not as a prostitute, but as a respectable woman who was doing the best she could with her life. She didn't have as many choices, perhaps. We don't know much about her. But we know that a woman who's had 5 husbands, one who she's married to, probably is not going to be president of the women's club. We do know that about her. We also know what about it's noon. It's the 6th hour, that's noon. And you didn't go draw water at noon. You drew water early in the morning while it was cool or late in the evening when it was cool. And women gathered at the well. That was a free moment. That was their oasis when they talked with other women without the men around. For support, that was their therapy group. And I don't think she was included. So there she is at the well, and here comes Jesus. Now, what was Jesus' title? What they call him?
Rabbi?
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbis did not talk to women in public. Only their wives. 0. Jesus was taught from the time he was little about those Samaritans because they didn't worship Yahweh properly. They were contamination. So right away, we should think, what is this story about? The longest dialogue in the whole Bible between any two people. It's artwork. How is God trying to get our attention? What's Jesus trying to teach us? What do you think? If your Bible were closed, from what you know about that story, what do you make of this?
Well, acceptance, forgiveness.
Acceptance.
God's love for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Jews had excluded the Samaritans, but I don't think God had.
No.
There were reasons that they were the way they were, and they never forgot Yahweh. They also worshiped other gods of the people that had come and conquered them. There were 6 or 7 other gods that they had as lesser gods, but they never forgot who they came from.
So do you
And-
think that was part of it too, that they were worshiping
That's
other
it.
gods?
That is,
And
that was their
just-
contamination.
Yeah, separated them out.
And right there was Jacob's well. It's still there today. You can go walk down some steps and sit at Jacob's well. You can get a dipper and drink out of Jacob's well. An oasis from the time of Jacob. I just think it's fascinating. So here they are at this ancient well of water, and they get into a conversation. Now, do you remember the questions that are asked? He asked the first question. She's sitting there by the well, and he asks her for something.
He asked her for water.
He asks her for water, and she is surprised.
Yeah.
She said, "You would ask me for water? I'm a Samaritan." He could tell that by the way she talked and what she wore. He also could tell that she was a loner and she was there to draw water at need. So he didn't have to be a prophet to know something was going on. But in their dialogue, when she wants some of this living water that he's talking, he said, "Lady, if you knew who I was, and that I can give you living water so you never have to come here to drink again." She says, "Well, give me a drink of this living water so I don't have to come to this well." And what is living water? Well, he says it's the water that lives up, it bubbles up in you to everlasting life. It's water for your spirit. Now I'm going to ask you a question on literature or drama or art. Where in your life have you been when you have been enthralled by the art of someone else that's just maybe made you high on that lovely experience for days, or made you want to go to find out more about that kind of music or that kind of art, or that kind of an author that writes in a way that touches your life and takes you out of a moment of misery or drudgery that gives you hope. Now I'm going to be quiet and listen to any expressions from what you would call the world of art, not the everyday, but the sublime. I'm interested.
Well, I just heard something on KBBS. It was on Kelly singing,
Oh,
you know, and I just heard bits and pieces. But then when I saw him standing there, and I thought, oh, why is he standing with his eyes closed? My USB, and I'm going, the poor man is blind, but yet he has overcome that, and you know, will be singing.
it's lovely, isn't it, to hear him singing?
Oh, it's more than lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's lovely.
So yes,
Yeah,
if you want to find out more, I go, yeah, you know, I do.
yeah.
So-
Music is a gift from God to lift our souls.
Well,
It's not just for entertainment, it's to touch something in us.
Well, just the inspiration of what he's
Inspiration.
had to overcome.
That's right.
You know, and I was saying, how would he learn all these songs? How, you know, it's really a gift. So
it's hard enough when you can read news.
Tell me
To
about it.
to do that without sight.
So that was one thing.
It is a blessing to the world.
Mhm.
Music, tell me some specifics. Where in your life do you go for an oasis where you do something that transports you, or where you lose track of time? Because that's one of the bugaboos of great artists. They say, I lose time. I don't know. I'm in another sphere.
Well, John goes running.
All right, yeah.
Okay, where is he? Do I call the police?
He's out running. He's all right. Runners talk about getting in the
A
zone.
trance, yeah.
They're in another, and they can, yes, here he is. Welcome. Any other examples?
I go up to the mountains, I go up to Mount Laguna, and it just restores me. I can't even explain. And I question myself about it, because it's like, you're spending a lot of gas and a lot of time, but I know that it's nourishment for me. It's in a really big way. And I think the vastness, when you go up over the Sunrise Highway and you look out to the desert, you see the rock outcroppings, and there are so many good trees. It really renews me.
Renews, nourishes, restores. Those are all words about food that we don't see or know about unless we take the time.
I also have a little table where I have paints and paper and scissors and all that stuff, so I can go in there and make something. I think I come from a real lineage of makers. My grandmother made things, my mother made things, and I actually brought two things that my daughter made and that my granddaughter made. My daughter sent me this when we were separate for some time, because when I would write her letters, it was really before email. At the end, I would always say, love, love, love your mom. And here it has love, love. There was a third love down here, but it has fallen off because this is getting old. So that's a treasure. And then many years later, I'm sure she helped my granddaughter make this. And so when I was looking through my Christmas stuff, I thought, that's a treasure.
Yes, it is.
So this maker thing is,
And then put those up so they show, because they're like a dip, they're like a tube. They really, it's interesting that they go so well together in shape and form and color and design. Did anybody else bring anything? That was an assignment. If you thought of it and remembered it, I'm really glad that you did that. Now, how many of you are going to be getting out Christmas decorations? Are they all up? Are they all out?
no, not yet.
How many of you have treasures that you've collected over the years? And when you think, does that feed your spirit? The memories of Christmas past, little hands. I was so blessed by my Girl Scout leaders as a girl growing up, because the head leader had a philosophy that children's art is precious, and whatever you give them to make, to do, should be of lasting quality. Because that's how they learn that they're appreciated and that their gifts are unique, that you never say, now, you say, well, tell me what you're thinking about with this. And they'll tell you, and they'll get stronger in their, they won't be the people that grow up and say, well, I can't draw, or I can't paint. Because what we do make with our hands are lasting. Let's talk about some of the symbolism. This, after I guess 35 years or more, is not as fluffy as it once was. But there was a time when you could tell that this was the living water growing out of her after she had listened to him. And you can tell that they're on kind of a road. This is the way. I am the way. I'm the living water. This cross on Jesus' robe is symbolic of what it's going to cost him and what it's going to give to us. This lily, I don't think Jesus probably ever had a robe that had a lily embroidered on it, but I embroidered this lily on it as a sign of Easter, of the resurrection. This is a sprig of wheat. This probably took as much time as anything else on the banner, because we are the kernels of wheat that become the bread for the next generations. And he said that just like the grape is crushed to make the wine, the wheat is crushed to make the bread. So we need not fear the crushing blows of life. That's what Jesus is telling us. Is there more to life than what meets the eye?
Sure.
Sure. All right. Yes, yes. Amen. Jesus has the longest conversation with any person anywhere else in the Bible or the New Testament with a person that he'd been taught you don't talk to. Then she says to him, after he says to her, well, you're asking the right questions when you say, give me this living water. You better go get your husband and bring it, because I wondered last night for the first time, is he just getting on, is he just remembering that he's not supposed to be talking to her? Or did he know all along? I don't think he knew all along. I think he was thirsty out of his need, his human need for a drink of water. And she's like, where's your dipper? Where's your cup? We can't use the same vessels. And so they engage one another in one of the most important conversations in the whole Bible. God doesn't honor all of our boundaries. God is present in Jesus' life and in the lady's life on this important early afternoon in Samaria at Jacob's well. He says, well, you told me the truth then. He said, you had 5 husbands and the one you're with right now, you're not married to him. And she said, she says, you know, we Samaritans worship here and you Jews worship down in Jerusalem. But there'll come a time when the Messiah will come and we'll all know how to worship together. And he said, that's right. And if you knew who you were speaking to right now, you wouldn't be asking for this water, you'd be asking for living water. And she said, well, that's the water I want. You must be a prophet. Are you the Messiah? Are you the Messiah? He asks her questions and she answers him truthfully. She asks him this question. And what does he say? Go get your husband. So he's not there yet, is he? She's completely open with him. And he's still a little guarded. Well, you better go. Oh, I don't talk like this to women. Better go get your husband. But she is so convinced that he's the Messiah. What does she do?
She goes away.
Yeah, she goes to the town and she says what?
Come and
meet the man who told me. I think he's the Messiah.
he told me everything I've ever done.
He knows me.
Yeah.
What do you call someone that brings people to Jesus?
Disciples.
Yeah, that's one thing. What else? They're more than that. She's a disciple now,
But an apostle
an apostle.
An evangelist.
and a band.
She's all these things. She is not a fallen woman.
Yeah.
She is an instrument of God. And she brings all these people to town or to the well. Now, in the meantime, they're on their way. And to see how this is like a drama. Meanwhile, back at the well, the disciples have arrived and they say, they saw him talking to her and they are not pleased. He didn't sit down like that with them and have that kind of a deeply spiritually intimate conversation, not yet. They weren't there yet,
They didn't need it as much as she did.
huh?
They didn't need it as much as she did.
That's right, that's partly true, yeah. And they were part of the in group.
Yeah.
They had not called him Messiah yet in the transition of this gospel. I think he was tickled, thrilled, anointed, pleased that his ministry was reaching beyond what he thought it was going to reach and that it was good. I think he got it. I think he was in the process of growing. And I'm sure he was just,
Cheryl said Jesus had an immediate human need and the woman had a long-term spiritual need.
yeah,
And so to top that, to go on top of what Cheryl said, kind of what we were talking earlier, I think the woman was already at the point where she could meet Jesus.
yes,
And have this spiritual
I do too.
right? And the disciples didn't. They were still kind of along the road, but she was
Along the
ready
road.
to
And
accept
so-
that.
Part of this along the road, I want to talk about in the local church or any church I've ever been in. It is so easy to get mired down with schedules, rehearsals. One more thing I forgot. And to forget, we're here for the living water and we're here to be living water to one another and to so that people will be attracted to us out on the way of life, out of the well. Just because.
If
So
I could add
they-
something real fast. I just been thinking about the story in particular as it pertains to art,
Yes,
because I feel like for many centuries, art did the exact same thing. It separated people.
Yeah.
Those who could, understand art or could afford to
Ah.
see art, which is still an issue today. But there are people who have been in breaking and saying art is for everyone.
that's right. That's right.
In New York, there was this beautiful abandoned building where spray painters would come in, and they had decorated the whole building, every inch of this community, specifically brown and Black people had come in, who were creative, who would be vilified and would get in trouble for spraying other parts of the city.
Right.
And at some point, I guess somebody bought the building and they painted it white, completely white over all of the art.
Oh,
And so
Oh.
there are pictures online. I don't exactly know what the building is called, but again, it's a great symbol, unfortunately and sadly, of still how people feel about art and who's in and who's out. And I think
Yes.
the story kind of you could connect it in some way of like who's in and who's out, depending on the type of art they make, or if they can afford it, or if they can, if they do art a certain way, even though there are so many creative people out in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, especially when it comes to art about Jesus. Having a variety, I think, is
Yeah.
important, and seeing that in the church and something like this, I think, is a great example of that.
Yeah, I don't consider this beautiful, but I consider it educational. I'm not a textile artist, and we were working on a project. But I think that it is more lasting for me than a 20-page paper that would have gotten lost in a file drawer in one of my many rooms. And I think it's tactile, children can touch it. When the disciples get back to Jesus, they say something about, did anybody bring you a Big Mac, or have you had a piece of pizza, or what's going on here? They're not with the program. And he talks about harvest. What?
They never seem to be with the program.
They're always kind of like.
And Jesus woke up every morning and said, I have to start all over again with these guys, because
Just
they've
about.
forgotten everything I've taught them.
I think maybe God scratches God's head every night. They're still praying the wrong prayer. It's right in front of them. You know, did you ever feel that as a parent or as a child care that they're not getting the lesson you're teaching them? That's part of the human condition.
And then suddenly the light bulb goes on.
And see, that light bulb goes on, and that's, I get it, you can see it,
Uh-huh.
yeah. You can see when a person gets an idea that nobody else has had yet.
I have a question, which may be off the. How did the Samaritans feel about the Jews?
Well, I think I can't speak for the Samaritans, but I know what it feels like to not be worthy.
Well,
And I
no,
think, how did they feel?
where does this take place?
In
In
Samaria.
Samaria.
Mhm.
Jesus goes to a Samaritan city.
Yep.
And sits down at a Samaritan well.
Yep.
And asks for a drink of water. And what does the woman say? How is it a Jew ask a drink of a woman of Samaria?
Yeah.
And then it says in parentheses, which I assume are John's parentheses. Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans.
That might be
But
for us, the reader.
If a Samaritan was writing this, would he say Samaritans do not share things in common with Jews?
I don't think I think the Samaritans were more inclusive, not less inclusive, but I don't think that I think they held fast to their own concepts. It was the Samaritan that helped the man along the way on the road to Jericho. Maybe they were more giving and less exclusive. I don't know. But I do know that anytime a power group tries to put down another group, it's the other group that rises up stronger. And their children seem to be more wholesome. There are problems, but be careful when you try to put down anything, because humankind is like yeast and it will rise. In fact, it may assume the values that you have relinquished in order to keep them down. The gift of creativity may pass too. That's what I see in history. I see it in churches. When any church thinks it is better than, and certain other people aren't as good enough to be, they may lose the living spirit. They may still have beautiful stained glass windows, but they may not have the presence of the living joy.
Yeah, I've seen churches fall like that.
They may have endowment,
My mother calls it taking the candlestick away. That's what-
painting the candlestick white.
taking-
I never heard that. I know
Away.
just what she means.
Take it away.
Taking it away.
Just taking the candlestick away,
Away.
which means
Yeah.
there's no light.
There's no life or light. I am the light of the world. Children would ask me about this. Can't see it, but this may come down completely. But Jesus' hand is what?
the light.
The light of the world. They say, what's he got that claw hand about? I'll get you if you're naughty. No, I would never say that to children. But artists take liberties that they didn't know they were going to do. And that's inspiration. Now, what does inspiration mean?
Take it away.
The breath. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna just kind of put this, it's heavy. But I want to show you this part. When the disciples are trying to make a thing about the food and who's he been ready to break bread with.
Yeah.
What color is the wheat on a field? You've seen wheat fields. What color?
Golden, sort of golden.
Sort of golden.
Yeah.
But Jesus said the harvest is white, doesn't he? Now that's odd. Did Jesus not have golden in his color box? Of course he did. What would be white that would be on the field?
Yeah.
There's a hint.
You have the lamb.
Lambs. What do you think he's talking about? What harvest is Jesus talking about?
Us.
Us. I'm the good shepherd. And do you see any semblance, any I am that reminds you of a shepherd? Is there anything there? Did I put like a shepherd's crook anywhere in there?
I don't see one.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. No. I don't know. Some artwork is never done, but you run out of time. This is a piece of hand carved wood from the Black Forest. And I led a group of pilgrims to Oberammergau one year. And this was what I got from one of the shops. And a lot of their artwork is very Bavarian and would look more Gothic. But I thought this looked like something you'd want to touch. And the carver who made it was there, and he said, you know, I made that years ago. And he said, whenever I put a price on something, I don't change it. And he said, you're getting a real bargain. And I said, my life has been a whole bargain. I appreciate your work and I understand. I said, I didn't know that, but this one is the one that makes me feel that I can touch. Not that I should just keep it up on a shelf to dust it. There's something so inviting about this. And even in the back, the way the shading of the wood seems so artistic to me that I and the love, I mean, you know, this child is protected, but growing strong. This child, I think, thinks it's still free, but it's well protected and loved. This is a little amazing sculpture I got in Israel, in Jerusalem. And you know, there's an art district in Jerusalem that is Gothic, and it was made when the Crusaders were there. And it looks like you might be in France or England, but it was covered over with debris for centuries. And when they were digging, either to build or do a subway or something, they found, I would say, something that goes from here to the end of the parking lot almost, that are like shops or houses. And one of them was an art gallery that I went into. And there was just the woman who was running the art gallery there that day. And I looked at this and I was just transformed by it. I'll pass it around. You can't break it. You can't wreck it. It's been through.
I will.
But just check it out, how the artist designed that. The artist that made this does public art throughout the world. A lot of it started in Israel and in Jerusalem. And I knew it was a fine artist because I recognized this little miniature set because I'd seen his artwork at like parks and things in Jerusalem. But it was way out of my price range. And she said, I can tell you really like that. I said, I absolutely love it. And she said, what's the best offer you could give me on that? And I said, I don't want to insult you. And she handed me a business card. She said, just write it down on this card and I'll call the artist. So I say it was for $600 and I put 100. Say it was $350 and I put 85. I don't remember, but it was way less than it was marked for. So she called and left a message. And he called back and he said, is she a dealer? And she said, are you a dealer? And I said, no, I'm a poor person from Southern California. And I'm enthralled. I recognized his work from what I'd seen in the city. And I'm just moved by that. And she said, sold.
Wow.
And then I noticed when she was writing up the order that she had a tattoo on her arm from one of the camps.
This is amazing.
And she was a lovely, pretty woman, I would say at the time, maybe 35 years old, maybe 40, in a dark blue dress with a white lace collar and just darling, short, black, beautiful hair. And the sun was coming in this Gothic room built by the Crusaders. And a Jewish survivor had made a gift by calling the artist to a Protestant minister from Southern California. And I saw God's hand in that. The sun was coming in such a way. And I said, I just feel the presence of the divine. And she started to cry. Tears came down and she said, you know, I do too. And I said, I noticed your mark. And I said, I I know we're both survivors and that this has been a very precious, precious, precious moment. And so when people connect over a broken loaf or at a concert, when you reach out to a stranger and hug them, or you're on your way out of the ballet and you look at a stranger, you both are just transformed. Those are connections of the living God. And one of the things I wanted us to especially get from the study of John is people talk about the theology, and this is not about catechism. This story tells us this is not about how you were taught. It is how you live. And what you do in the moment that might be hallowed ground where you never even knew existed on earth. Many of us have been shown by the love of God that things that we were taught by the people that loved us, who were good people, are not necessary now.
Yes.
And it's really hard when you've been taught that something is sacred and holy, that it may not be God's sacred and holy, but some human being's sacred and holy. Or maybe God's idea is like, yes, I told you that, but that's because it was raining and there was a blizzard and it was life-threatening. But sometimes we have one set of rules for survival during an emergency and another for the picnic or the celebration at the wedding. You have to, if God wants us to know anything, it's how to do what when. Because God says, my name is I am. Now, what does that mean? Think of what that name means.
Yeah.
If it weren't God saying it, and you just saw that on the chalkboard, what does I am mean?
Everything.
Everything, it's existence.
All of it.
It's living and breathing, isn't it? It's being. And then you think about what did God tell us in Micah? We sing it after the collection often. What does the God require of us? To what? There's an action word there. To starts with a D. Do. To do. We're to be, and we are to do. And that's not catechism. That's living. So we know when we see the eyes of a human being that we've been taught, we don't look into those people's eyes. We do this when we come to them and hurry on by. No, that's not what God tells us. These are my precious children. In kindergarten, the children are most drawn to those who are different. They're curious, they want to know, and they want to play.
Don't care what they look like. They don't care if they're sitting in a chair. They don't care. They don't care. They just want to know
Yeah,
you.
yeah, that's right.
They want to see you.
That's right. So I think the Gospel of John tells that well and gives us permission to relinquish some of the important rules that people may have been taught each other for survival that were tribal and not human family. Do you have any ideas about that yourself? I see that going on here in the story between this woman and this man.
You know, that we separate out who's in and who's out. And really, what I believe God's saying is all in, everyone, every bit of it.
Even gender. Think of the gender divides about what women do and what men do, and who gets power and who doesn't. I think that's abolished in this story. And it gave me strength in ministry because it may not be equal, but it's very good. And I think it gets better every generation. But I had a strong feeling when I was in Salem on the way to a religious conference that the tables can be turned at any moment very quickly in any society that decides, well, we've let them go too far. And I think our country is experiencing some of that now. Well, we let women have the vote. We let blacks have the vote. Now they've all just gone a little too far, and we didn't need it. And that's why I think these stories are perpetually alive, and encouragement for us that it's not about political party or skin color. It's about I am what? I do how? That's our religion. I think that's in the Old Testament, I think it's in the New Testament, and I think it's our testament in this time and place. How do we stand up for Jesus? Because truth and justice are always in every culture that is doing well. And when a culture shifts to greed and cruelty, take a look at Rome. It can't stand, it falls. And it's like God takes the candle to another campsite. And not only is democracy in peril, but so are truth and justice. And really welcoming one another. Think how long it was from the time that black men got the vote till white women and black women got the vote, because the vote is power. And I'm just using it as an example, because one of the things I noticed as a woman who was delegated to formerly men's work was as soon as women began to become ministers, they got to be associate pastors. The senior pastorate was not open to them. Now it is. I think one reason women got to be ordained was because men's wives were no longer pouring at the church tea, but they were teaching school, becoming attorneys, and the church needed women to do the children's work and to pour at the tea. And then women said, well, I think God has gifted us for the whole enchilada. And I think God equips all of us for all the jobs that need to be done. And I honestly believe that the best work is done when men and women sit down together and admire one another's gifts and are enhanced and bubbled up. Yep.
Hi, Mr. Larry.
Good morning, welcome.
Oh, he made it. Look at this.
Yes.
Count him on the attendance.
I decided it was time to get back here.
Well, you are back and we're glad to see
Yay,
you.
Larry. Yeah, bring up the chair.
Two other pieces of, actually three pieces of artwork. You see the baptism, John the Baptist, I think is baptizing Jesus in that ceramic plaque. Those are from the friars that are out in the desert at Yarmouth. Does anybody know where I forget. They make their living out in the desert by doing these plaques.
In Israel?
No, in
No?
Southern California.
Oh, and.
One of them on a bicycle from Belgium connected with two or three others that wanted to live out in the desert to do God's work, and they're a thriving community. They also make honey, and people, anybody can go there on
Wow.
retreat, and I've been thrilled by their artwork. And so that I have that angel, that's the Holy Spirit, above Jesus and John at the baptism. And I hang that in my bathroom. And the one on Tessa's, you can pass those around, because this one is from a very fine Japanese artist who was studying in Claremont, getting his doctorate. And my sister was living in Claremont, and she said, Mary, you've got to come and see this guy's work. He already has a world reputation, but he's going to be a real master.
Oh,
And that's called Tres Marias, the Three Marys. And because I know we talked last week about some confusion about the Marys. This is a Japanese man from Japan studying in Claremont. And Katie said, he's made his artwork affordable. You've got to come and get one of these block prints, Mary. He's doing something that nobody else has done.
Yeah. Wow.
And he does large things too, but and I can't remember his name. Sometimes I can read it off of there and tell it to you, but anyway, I was very moved by that. And about like we three kings, I see a triptych, a similarity, and it doesn't say three kings, it says the Magi. And we also know that some of the Magi, of those who studied the stars, were women. And I think they came as a group, like an entourage. And so I think when men and women and boys and girls work together, have their own time at the well separately, and do their own stuff whenever they want to. But for important decision making and in the arts, in the teaching arts, in drama, in theater, in poetry. But think of when the Song of Songs was written. It's lyrical love poetry between a man and a woman. And we were studying this at seminary, and the professor said, well, this is a man talking. And I said, how can you tell? And I said, I've lost track of who's the man and who's the woman. And I've been looking at this carefully. And I think when it comes to ecstasy, religion and romance share a common vocabulary. There's something marvelous about being born a human being and the things that fill our cup till it bubbles over, that we just have to share it. So that's today's lesson. And thank you for coming, and thank you for bringing artwork, and thank you for participating, and for taking a final look at this part of John in a little different way.
I think I've seen this before.
Hmm?
I think I've seen this before.
You may have.
Are there prints out there somewhere?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.